Hello and welcome to Yay Rising, the Indigenous podcast on WKBY 1080 Inspirational Radio. This is your host, Crystal Cavalier and Jason Crazy Bear. And today we're going to be talking just a little bit about the Occaneechi history here in Virginia and North Carolina. I wanted to let you guys know more about the Occaneechi and the natives that lived in the area. So, again, you guys know I was born here in Alamance County. My grandparents were born here. My mother was born here. My great-grandparents were born here. And it goes all the way back up until about my fifth great-grandparent. And then they were born in Virginia. So the first historical reference to the Occaneechi was in the 1650s, when an English explorer learned that the Occaneechians lived on a small island in the Roanoke River. And this island, they farmed cornfields on the north bank of the river. And also there were the Tutelo and the Saponi. And they settled on neighboring islands. The Occaneechi were particularly significant in the fur trade between the Virginians, or the London colony of Virginia, and the various Piedmont tribes during the 1660s and 1670s. And today, our Occaneechi language is no longer spoken, but it was believed that there was an Eastern Siouan dialect similar to the Saponi and the Tutelo language today. But I want to also let you guys know that it was a trade language, and most tribes spoke that. Now, this Virginia explorer, his name was Abraham Wood. He visited the tribe in the late 1600s and described the tribe's influence on the deerskin trade. Their location along the Great Trading Path was prime and connected the tribe not only to the Virginia colony, but also with the Catawba and the Cherokee. In 1676, the Occaneechi were ambushed and driven out by Nathaniel Bacon and the English settlers, and he massacred hundreds of our tribal members. And our tribe migrated from the Roanoke River to the Eno River in modern-day Orange County. So, by the early 1700s, the Occaneechi had transferred north to the Meherrin River, which is there in Brunswick County, to garner protection from colonists at Fort Christiana, and that was set up by Governor Spotswood. And I'll talk about that later, coming up. So, tribes including the Saponi, the Tutelo, and the Maiponski also sought protection from the Virginia government. Now, these tribes were descended from larger Siouan tribes that lived in North Carolina and Virginia during, they call it prehistoric times, but we're still living history, so it's not prehistoric. And according to William Byrd II, the various tribes united into a single community under the name Saponi, and the Occaneechi distinction was quickly lost. Now, starting around the 1820s, many Occaneechi moved to Ohio and other Midwestern states to join their relatives, because by then we were already in the middle of a war with Andrew Jackson. Racial times were getting really bad, and they left the South. And so here's the history that has been told in our community. And, this was by Lawrence Dunmore, who's my cousin. And, I've just read just about all of his work and most of our newsletters. And they called us, or where we live, the old settlement of Little Texas in the Pleasant Grove Township in Alamance County. And until the middle part of the 20th century, the community was largely occupied in agricultural pursuits, right? We had many farms and we farmed tobacco. And sometimes after that, the Industrial Revolution happened and there was a lot of mills, and most of our people left the farm and then they went to work in the mills. And, the agriculture, it just started to decline. I know our family stopped doing tobacco. We stopped growing sweet potatoes in the greens. And now, as the factories left, people now are trying to find a different type of job. Now, the Occaneechi band of the Saponi Nation is the lineal descent of the Saponi and related Indians who occupied the Piedmont of North Carolina and the Piedmont in Virginia. And specifically of these tribes, the Saponi and the Tutelo and related natives formerly became tributary to the Virginia under the treaties of Middle Plantation in 1677 and 1680, and under the subsequent treaty of 1713 with the colony of Virginia, which agreed to join together as a single community. So all of our native tribes, they banded together. Now, this confederation formed a settlement at this reservation called Fort Christiana along the Virginia-North Carolina border in now what is Brunswick County. So just a couple of counties over from Pittsylvania County. Now, this confederation included the Occaneechi, the Eno, the Saponi, the Tutelo, and other elements of related communities such as the Sara or Chirral. Now, all of these communities were remnants of much larger Siouan communities, but we have been decimated after contact by the colonists. Now, it's said that our Saponi Confederation was closely allied with the Catawba Confederation and occupied several forts and settlements located in what is now Greensville County and Brunswick County, Virginia, from about 1680 until the mid-18th century. Now, remember I told you most of my fifth grade grandparents, they were born in Greensville County, and some were born in Brunswick County, Virginia. Now, during the mid-18th century, when the last Virginia fort, Christiana, fell into disuse, the natives continued to occupy 45 villages and other settlements in North Carolina until the mid-1700s during that period. So I just wanted to talk to you guys about the Saponi Reservation. I had talked about it before. So the Saponi Reservation was located in present-day Brunswick County, Virginia, with a fort named Fort Christiana, like Christ, and then Anna, near its center. Prior to contact, our Siouan-speaking indigenous people referred to themselves as Yesa, which means the people. And we inhabited the vast majority of Virginia for thousands of years and are related to the Sioux from the Dakotas. In 1714, the Yesa were collectively renamed Saponi by the invading European illegal aliens in a treaty and were assigned a 23,000-acre 36 square mile tract of reservation land, covering about 25% of current day Brunswick County. Now, Virginia's first inhabitants, again, were a part of a larger speaking Siouan nation which spanned 6 of today's states. And the nation was comprised of thousands of communities with the names such as Saponi, Tutelo, Eno, Occaneechi, Stucana, Monacan, Manahanoks, Nassisians, Chirral, Sisapahal, Saxapahal, Waccamaw, Wateree, Waxhaw, Wokon, Sugary, Hanoski, Suteree, Kiawe, Catawba, Chirral, and Sara. But again, starting in 1492, indigenous people in the Americas were put through a Holocaust lasting century where tens of millions of indigenous people, over 90% of the entire population, died from horrendous extermination efforts, including biological terrorism, murder, and torture. And Yesa natives in what is now Virginia, they believe there was, it says by 1601 at the creation of Jamestown, the number of American Indians were down 6,000 total natives in now what is Virginia. So while maintaining distinctions among themselves, sometimes exaggerated by the non-Indian contemporaries and by later historians who distort the truth, the various elements within the Saponi Confederation had common origin and were closely related linguistically and culturally. And the final treaty with Virginia included an agreement among the 4 signatory groups to formally incorporate as one tribe under the name Saponi. So in January 1715, Virginia's Governor Spotswood wrote a letter to Bishop of London describing how he engaged the Saponi. And this is, remember, before the formation of the United States. So all of these treaties that we have, they've been broken. And, that brings us up to Nathaniel Bacon, who actually destroyed our tribe. So when it says acculturated members, that just means they're assimilated. So assimilated members of the Confederation and their descendants gradually formed a settled community that over time became geographically and culturally distinct from the traditional community. So that means we had assimilated into European ways of life. Formal marriages and common law relationships between natives of the community, natives of other communities, and European neighbors, and also African ancestry, contribute to the divisions between the settled community and more conservative community members. There's evidence of this existence of this community begins to appear in local records such as the census as early as the 1720s. And yeah, a great majority of the tribe's members, like our people here, especially here in Pleasant Grove, we can trace our ancestry back to Indians that are identified in such records. Now, again, we live right across that border. And so, researchers for our community have documented the development of this community from the late 17th until the 19th century. By the time of the immigration to the Midwest and other parts of the South had reduced it to just a handful of families. So that is our history here of the Occaneechi, and we just continue to live today. There was one important thing I wanted to mention. By 1718, the treaty that I talked about earlier, it was violated. The land that was given to us was taken away, and no new lands were provided. Some Saponi stayed on their stayed near or on the reservation, while others moved throughout Virginia and North Carolina. Laws were passed, eventually making it illegal for indigenous people to live in the Southeast. These people went underground by being classified as mulatto, colored, negro, or black. Others immigrated to the north and west into Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, Canada, and the Midwest. Surviving genocide, theft of their land, and loss of much of their culture, thousands of Saponi survived. And around the middle to early 21st century, individuals and communities began to reassert their Saponi identity and attaining various degrees of recognition. So that leads us into Indigenous Peoples Day. So now I kind of want to talk to you guys about an upcoming holiday. It's called Columbus Day, but we don't celebrate that. We call it Indigenous Peoples Day. So, like all minorities, the stereotypes associated with Native Americans or American Indians have been molded through pop culture, racist anthropology for generations. Offensive visuals remain canonized, not only in the minds of Americans, but in minds of people all across the world. But for people of my community here in North Carolina, we are a cultural of difference in appearance is embraced and normalized. Now, unlike most other Native American tribes across the United States, the citizens of our people here in Alamance County, we were never forced to move, but we formed an incredibly strong bond with the region and the place. Now, we did go into hiding, but I will tell you that we had to assimilate into mainstream. So the history of indigenous people in the United States is very thorny and vast. There's a horrific legacy of entire cultures being violently and systematically eradicated. And then there are stories of survival, fortitude, and deep connection to the environment and to people. And of course, our indigenous history doesn't begin or end with either of these stories. So, as I go and my husband and I, Jason, we go and we talk to the educators in the community, we have to figure out where to start unwinding the huge tapestry that can be overwhelming for students and for teachers. Every step towards action and accountability starts with the inquiry and research. And I just hope this radio show will help you understand that you can explore the past and the present lives of indigenous people who live right here in your community. So, Christopher Columbus's journal entry about the indigenous people he encountered on October 11th, 1492, it was the day he stumbled upon present-day Haiti. And he said in his notes, "They should be good servants and intelligent, for I observed that they quickly took in what was said to them." That day alone, Columbus decided to take 6 natives as slaves. What followed was a total annihilation marked by thievery, rape, enslavement, and the brutal deaths of indigenous people. Nevertheless, Columbus, who never set foot in present-day United States, has been honored with his own federal holiday for more than 80 years. But an increasing number of jurisdictions are aiming to stop honoring a brutal colonizer and start celebrating the peoples on whose land we live today. So Los Angeles made the big waves August 30th when its city council voted to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. It was the biggest city to make the change so far, and the third to do so in the same month of August. In September, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Davenport, Iowa did the same thing. And as of 2017, there were 70 cities, colleges, and states who now recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, Columbus crimes have been well understood by some people for quite a long time. So what's behind the seemingly sudden desire on the part of so many citizens to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day? And where are people organizing to replace the next holiday? So words matter. And we have to get the name right. Before Columbus' arrival and the subsequent European colonization, there were thousands of nations in what we know is called America, or the Americas. These nations were different from one another. They had distinct languages, customs, and territories. A lot of these nations survived genocide. In the loan, we can easily recognize the Hopi people, Chickasaw people, Shinnecock people, Occaneechis, Monacan, Rappahannock, Saponi. And for too long, Indigenous peoples have been collapsed into a one singular people. Indigenous Peoples Day, with that, ends that and acknowledges the fact that this is a celebration for and many different nations. So we also need to denounce racist violence, which comes in many modern forms. So there's very visible resurgence of white supremacists and neo-Nazi whose ideology is firmly rooted in defending and protecting the legacies, colonization, and enslavement. And if you don't denounce the racist daily violence that has been happening all across the United States, you just have to denounce that. While racist violence remains a real threat, there needs to be real practice to combat white supremacy, including through signature statues and holidays. So recognize that these name changes didn't happen overnight, and they've been happening for decades. So in 1989, South Dakota became the first state to replace Columbus Day, which is observed the second Monday in October, with Native American Day. Berkeley, California was the first to change the holiday to Indigenous Peoples Day in 1992. Two states, Vermont and Alaska, have replaced the holiday more recently. There have been years of hard work led by Indigenous people behind all of these efforts. And one activist said in a news article, "We stand on the shoulders of activists that have been working on this for decades." Now, keep an eye on these cities where the change could come next. So, like I said, Los Angeles, where the change has already taken place, is the second biggest city in the U.S. Chicago was the third. An Illinois Democratic candidate for governor says he's keen on replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day and work to get it done. Another city to keep an eye on is Boston. So those are some places that we have. I know here in Alamance County, we just have a proclamation. But we are working hard on to get it accepted by the county. I know in Orange County, the county next door, they have a countywide resolution that proclaims Columbus Day has been replaced by Indigenous Peoples Day. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. You can celebrate this with your children or your family. So number one, just learn whose land you're on. You can look at this map created by Aaron Capella. It's at tribalnationsmap.com. You can look out and it has the names of tribes and their locations. And you can also purchase this from his website. So, number two, examine artifacts. So, I know luckily some people who live out here in the rural part who farm, they find arrowheads and artifacts in their own backyard. So be sure and check out the National Museum of the American Indian, and you can look at artifacts from long ago. You can also see some things that are pretty contemporary. Now, you can also go onto the website and you can tune in for live stream events that are happening. Right now, we are in the midst of powwow season, so you could attend a couple of powwows and see the regalia, dance, competition, and prayer that's been happening. Then, you can also go to the Anti-Defamation League, and you could look at these lesson plans and complete with various examples of proclamation that have established the holidays. There's also a blog that talks about misconceptions, and I'm going to play this for you guys so you can hear. Brace yourselves to discuss the Trail of Tears. That is one of the ugliest chapters on the stain of American history today. The Indian Removal Act forced 18,000 Cherokee people from their land in Georgia. And as they walked from their homeland in Georgia and Cherokee, North Carolina to Oklahoma, 4,000 people died along the way. You can read Native books and that just don't otherize Native Americans. Leave them in some romantic past, right? These are contemporary things. So we have First Laugh, Welcome Baby by Roseanne Tahay and Nancy Blow Flood. Tall Chief, America's first prima ballerina. Talks about Maria Tall Chief. She grew up on the Osage Indian Reservation. You can talk about the Birch Bark House. Is a girl. It talks about a young Ojibwe girl who lives on an island in Lake Superior. And then secondly, I want you to listen to these 6 teenagers from Vogue talking about their 6 misconceptions.
Hi, my name is Donette Rayom. I'm a Native American girl, and today you're about to get schooled.
We've evolved and, not all of us lived in teepees.
Teepees were made for only travel uses.
Well, we own one, but we don't live in it.
We don't live in it.
We just camp in it whenever we want to.
We use them for things like ceremonies or camping and such, but we don't live in them. I have to say to that, where is my check? We really don't get anything for free. Everything we get, we have to work for it just like everybody else. If we had free healthcare, then the diabetes and heart disease rate would be very, very low. But at this point in time, it's very high.
Our dad works to provide for us. We don't get money or anything.
We get schooling for free. That's not true either. We have to meet the same academic requirements as any other ethnicity.
We still have to apply for scholarships.
I thought it was just Donald Trump that didn't pay taxes. If we were rich off of casinos, why would we need government money?
I think we just mostly lose our money to casinos. We all gamble.
Not all Native Americans wear headdresses. In some tribes, they don't wear them at all.
In my tribe, we don't wear headdresses, and we never did. Women don't wear headdresses, and you have to earn them.
It wasn't just given to them or handed down to them. You have to earn every feather that makes up that headdress. If you were to buy a headdress, that would be disrespectful because there's no meaning behind it. You didn't do anything to earn it. All you did was pay for it. That's racist. And a lot of people say that the redskin term comes from the color of our skin, but if you look at me, I'm not red.
Society is just played into it like the word redskins is okay when it's not.
The word redskin came about from the scalping of Native Americans. Redskin means the blood that was dripped from down on their faces. That's a major league sports team, and their argument against changing the name would be just like me having a conversation with my mom, and my mom asked me, "Why don't you like Brussels sprouts?" Because I don't.
It's not like we have a mascot that's called White Man.
In a way that's making fun of our culture and who we are, and we're human beings just like everybody else.
So those are some 6 misconceptions that these young women talked about. And so that is all for today. I thank you for listening to Yesa Rising here on WKBY 1080 Inspirational Radio. So we will see you guys next Monday at 1.